All right, the recording has started.
Okay, and it's my pleasure to call this special meeting of the Union Township Planning Commission to order, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag
to the United States of America, to the republic
which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So now we'll have our electronic roll call.
Clerk Cody.
Here.
Squatrito.
Here.
Webster.
Here.
Fuller.
Here.
Darren.
Here.
Shingles.
Here.
Faring.
Here.
LaBelle.
Here.
And Buckley is excused.
Okay, thank you. And we also have with us Rodney Nanny. We have Jennifer Loveberry. We have Eric. Banging on your last name already, Eric.
Morris.
Eric Morris. And is Peter here?
He is.
Yep. And Peter Galloway. Thank you. Minutes. We last met on May 19th. That was our first electronic meeting. We do have minutes from the May 19th meeting. They were in your packet. So if you want to take a look at those, are there any corrections to the May 19th minutes? I see they're being shown on the screen for us here. I have to say I didn't see anything myself. I thought they looked good.
Agreed.
Motion to approve the minutes from May 19th.
Support.
So there was a motion by LaBelle with a second by Cody to approve the minutes from May 19th as prepared. I'm going to use my chair's authority, I guess, to say we can forego a roll call vote on this, but I'll ask everyone to, well, first of all, are there any further discussion? If not, all in favor of approving the May 19th minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, I'm going to say that that motion carried, so our minutes are approved. Next item is correspondence, board reports, and presentations. I noticed there was one item of correspondence in our packet, the letter from the city of Clare and their proposed ordinance. And I thought it was pretty self-explanatory, but I'll just ask Rodney, is there anything you'd like to say about this?
No, I have nothing to add to it. It was really just to part of the notification process.
Yeah. So just be forewarned in the future when you go to Clare, watch out for ORVs. Could be anywhere. Let's see. So we'll move to board report. Anything from the Board of Trustees?
Not at this time. The special use is on our next meeting, but nothing at this time.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for our representative from the Board of Trustees? Not hearing any, so since Ryan's not here, and also I saw that the last meeting of the ZBA looked like it was canceled, so I'm assuming there's nothing to report from there. Anything from sidewalks and pathways, Denise?
No, have not met yet. We're meeting at the end of June, I believe.
Okay.
The
Thank
20th.
you.
Yes.
All right. Anything else that anyone has to report? All right. Any presentations? Not aware of any, but I'll just ask. Okay, if not, then we'll move on from that item. Next item is approval of agenda. So you've got your agenda. It has one new business item, the zoning ordinance amendment. And then other business is potentially some further discussion on the zoning ordinance update. Is there anything else that anyone's aware of that needs to be on tonight's agenda?
Move to accept the agenda as submitted.
Support.
The motion was by Shingles to accept the agenda as prepared, and the second was by Fuller. Further discussion? I'm again just going to ask for a voice vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So I'm going to declare our agenda approved. And we'll move on to public comment. So this is the portion of the meeting where individuals are invited to address the Planning Commission on any item that's not on tonight's agenda. Because we have a public hearing, comments on the public hearing topic will be taken at that time. So this is for comments on items that are not on tonight's agenda. If anyone would like to offer such a public comment, we ask you to follow the instructions, make your intentions, your desires known, and we'll allow you to, or we'll follow the procedure to allow people to make their comments. So public comment, we'll say it's open at, I don't know what time it is, 7:10, according to my computer. And I lost the lists over there on the side.
We do not have any attendees. Everybody that's in the meeting is visible to you right now.
Yeah, it had gone away, but I've got it back now. So I see you're right. There's no attendees. So we'll go ahead and close the public comment back up. No public comment was offered, and we can move on to our new business. So again, the new business item is the text amendment for the zoning ordinance for the parts on sand and gravel pits and also lot definition. So I will turn it over to Rodney for an introduction, then we'll move to the public hearing and then we'll consider it.
Thank you. The amendment you have before you has a draft date of May 15th, and it, as was mentioned, has two purposes. The address the lot definition first. In January, the Board of Appeals held a public hearing on a case that included a request for an interpretation of the definition of lot. And that interpretation was made, the Board of Appeals acted, and then subsequently acted on a variance request. This amendment to the zoning ordinance would overturn the Board of Appeals interpretation of lot, change the action they took on the variance request in January. But unfortunately, the definition of lot is in the current ordinance has some ambiguity to it. That's what led to the request. That's what led to the Board of Appeals acting. And so this is intended to clarify the characteristics of a lot, what it means to be a lot under the zoning ordinance, and to specifically address the relationship between the term lot and the Condominium Act, which under the Condominium Act, it's not really a lot, but it's a unit of land or a unit of a building that's created into a separate condominium unit. So this change addresses those items and primarily clarifies the definition of the term in response to the January case and before the Board of Appeals. The second element is a change to the status of sand and gravel pits as the land use in the current zoning ordinance. And this is in response to the action taken by the Board of Trustees to adopt the new extraction ordinance, which they did on the 12th of May. And that ordinance did go into effect a few days later. And so that with that change, our zoning ordinance is in conflict with that new ordinance. In that our zoning ordinance requires a special use permit and has certain standards that apply that have been in place at least since 1981. The extraction ordinance has a set of regulations that apply and a permit process that would apply to extraction activities in the township. And so this zoning ordinance amendment is to bring our zoning ordinance into consistency with the new extraction ordinance that was adopted by the Board of Trustees. And it essentially, number one, removes the special use permit requirement, makes sand and gravel pits an allowable permitted use in the ag district, and then basically it changes the standards to reference the extraction ordinance and say that the use must comply with the requirements of the extraction ordinance. So the two ordinances, although they're certainly related, follow very different approval processes. The extraction ordinance the board adopted is a regulatory ordinance. It does not require planning commission action. The action is entirely with the Board of Trustees. And so that proceeded forward. The zoning ordinance requires a public hearing in front of the Planning Commission, your recommendation one way or the other, and also a review and recommendation by the County Planning Commission. This process was intended to happen earlier on, actually. It was intended to be part of our March meeting where we did have a hearing scheduled, but we got caught up in the COVID-19 pandemic. And subsequent to that, we had a challenge trying to get a public hearing scheduled because of how the electronic meeting authorization was set up. We simply did not have enough days ahead of time notice to be able to set up an electronic meeting and hold it because of the various expiration dates of executive orders until the most recent one that extended this electronic meeting authority all the way till June 30th. And allowed us to hold this hearing. So with that in mind, this amendment is in front of you tonight for your review. I'm happy to answer questions. And I would certainly invite a recommendation to the Township Board of Trustees related to it.
Okay, thank you. So this is a public hearing item. And so that was duly announced in the newspaper. And so I think we'll move to the public hearing. Although we don't have any attendees at the moment, I'll just say in general, we want to give everyone who wants to address the Planning Commission on this topic an opportunity to do so. And so we'll ask each person who wants to address us to make their intentions known, and we'll recognize you and give you 3 minutes to give your comments. And then once everyone who wants to speak has had an opportunity to speak, we'll recognize individuals for additional comments if they wish to do so. So the public hearing on the text amendment 20-01 is open at 7:17. Is there anyone who would like to address the Planning Commission on this zoning ordinance amendment? Since no one is jumping up, obviously, I'll just ask Rodney, was there any written correspondence received on this?
There was no written correspondence, but we did have a hand up from Eric Morris, our township attorney. Just a moment.
I was just going to ask the same question that the chairman asked. So.
No, there was no written correspondence received related to this public hearing.
Okay. Yeah, if you want to speak, if you can click on the raise hand button at the bottom. I have the list in front of me. I don't actually see everyone's face right now. I only see the last person who spoke and then myself in the upper right corner. I don't have that tile of faces that I sometimes get on Zoom right now anyway. Alex?
Yeah, Rodney, can you expound on the lot definition changes?
Before we go on with that, I guess, let me do this. The public hearing is still open. So going once, going twice. So there's no one in the room other than us. So let the record show that no public comments were offered. Again, as we typically do, as we do in the real room, if anyone appears in the next few minutes here that wants to speak, we'll give them an opportunity to speak. But for the moment, it appears that no one is here to speak. So we'll go ahead and close the public hearing, at least for now anyway, with the record that no public comments were offered at 7:19. And with that, then we'll proceed with Alex's question.
Just to give a little more background on it, the question that came before the Board of Appeals in January involved essentially whether or not an individual condominium unit in a existing building, that is where an area of the building, certain square footage, has been set aside as a unit and purchased separately from other units in the same building, whether that was a lot, as the definition as a lot as the zoning ordinance defined it. The reason it came up was because the applicant that was coming before the Board of Appeals wanted variances related to signage, and essentially believe that having each individual condominium unit in a multi-unit building be considered a separate lot would allow him to have additional signage beyond what had been authorized under or basically determined to be appropriate by the zoning administrator. You'll see in the definition on the bottom of the first page, the crossed out language at the bottom is the existing definition, and you'll see it has three parts there. Such lot shall have frontage on a designated street, road, right of way, or easement, and may consist of. So it's sort of it may consist of any of these additional elements, and C is the reference to condominium ownership. The Board of Appeals specifically found that C alone, that if it was a condominium unit, that it was a lot, no matter whether it met any of the other characteristics of the lot definition that are listed there. That was their finding. Was it C? It could be considered exclusively, and so in this case, then the multi-unit condominium building had multiple lots under our definition. The challenge with that is that creates havoc with our zoning ordinance, which was never intended to have that kind of terminology or that kind of a definition used. You may have a multi-unit condominium building, but it's sitting on one lot as far as the zoning ordinance is concerned, prior to that Board of Appeals action. So this change to the definition is to make clear what a lot is and what it's not. And specifically, as I said, it would overturn the Board of Appeals interpretation of the term as it's defined right now and restore the commonly accepted definition of the term. So that's the intent of that part of it.
Doug, did you have a comment?
Yeah, Rodney, I'm just want to try to be clear with, or make sure I understand everything. We're voting on this text amendment, but to my knowledge, the township's under pending litigation regarding this extraction ordinance. Is this something that we can legally adopt or vote on? I mean, I'm certainly not comfortable doing that.
I would defer to Eric Morris, our township attorney. He is here tonight in part to answer that questions like that. So.
Yeah, so I will be a little bit circumspect with my response because, of course, this is an open meeting. But the outcome of the litigation is we're just starting that process. And so whether that is or is not successful for the township or for the plaintiff, you know, that's really something that will be decided down the road. At this point, I mean, I would just reemphasize the reasons for this amendment that are offered in your board packet, which is that it's intended at least to unify and harmonize the two ordinances so they can work together. And so at that, you know, with that, you know, what the court does with the litigation, we'll have to deal with, you know, whether it's ultimately the township's position is vindicated or not. But in the meantime, you know, having inconsistent ordinances presents a difficulty for the township.
And I would just add one element to that, and that is that the Board of Trustees did vote to adopt the extraction ordinance, which set essentially the policy for the township related to extraction operations. This is simply a corresponding amendment to carry forward that policy by amending the zoning ordinance to be consistent with it.
Okay, thank you.
I'm having an issue finding the raise your hand, but is it okay if I have a question?
Yeah, James, go ahead.
Okay, so if we deem this to be acceptable, but in the litigation they find that is not in favor of the township, it would just apply to those that are suing then, correct? So that from that group forward, this would take effect, and for them, it would possibly not take effect.
If I may, yes. So that's actually a fairly complicated question, but generally speaking, the court could have a number of remedies that it could enforce, and the township may be in a position to have to revisit this issue in order to have uniformity going forward. So it's at this point, it's a little premature to predict who this would or wouldn't apply to, right? But you know, the any pending special use permits right now would be pending under the current rules until they're changed. And as Rodney has explained in some detail, that presents a difficulty for the township as those rules are not yet uniform. That wasn't a satisfying answer, but I mean, the township could or could not be, there could be a variety of remedies that the court could order. And of course, the court could completely vindicate the township position as well.
Would this be presented to the court then of what our intentions are?
It would this action would probably be included in the record in the litigation, yes, because it has some relevance to the process.
So would it be
I will say the litigation presents other independent issues of this that will have to be decided. This would be probably a small part of it.
Next was Alex and then Mike. So Alex.
Yeah, I'm half wondering if there could be some perceived conflict of interest here, being this lot definition is directly related to an employer of mine and would have adverse effects.
If we're speaking of the applicant at the Board of Appeals in January, and I don't know your employer, but if that's what we're speaking of, that matter is settled. This change has no effect on variances that were granted. It simply changes the interpretation changes their interpretation to clarify it by updating the ordinance as shown here. If the Board of Appeals issues an interpretation of the zoning ordinance, the only way to change it is to amend the ordinance. So that's what we're doing to restore essentially the traditional definition of a lot that has the characteristics that you see here in the proposed definition, rather than the approach that the Board of Appeals took in January, essentially one small part of the definition and calling that the predominant part. But as I said, nothing that was done in January changes. We, in fact, I've already issued a sign permit under that variance, and we'll issue other permits under that variance as they ask for them, or ask for other permits as they request them under that variance. So this has nothing at this point, has no effect on the applicant from January.
Mike?
And really, we're just trying to clarify our ordinance so people don't have to go to the ZBA for understanding of the text, right? We're really not changing too much of the content. We may be rewording it, but it's just for clarity. Agreed?
Yeah, yes. Actually, all the items on your agenda tonight, of course, the next item on our agenda is exactly the same, clarifying the zone yards, making it as easy as possible to use and understand. Yes, that's all that this has done, is to clarify the ordinance and make it so that we're not putting things in front of the Board of Appeals.
And we're not really changing the rules to try and get out of a court case. This is just clarification of the tools we use for the people that use our tools.
With regards to the sand and gravel pits part, obviously, as I said, there has been a complaint, but this matter is simply to bring this zone ordinance into consistency with what is the Board of Appeal or Board of Trustees has already acted on. They essentially have set the new policy by the adoption of the extraction ordinance, and so we're just following.
Being that the sand and gravel is a permitted use, that pretty much goes in favor of the complainant, maybe, if they're in an ag district, correct?
Well, the goal with any ordinance, in fact, one of the stated goals of the extraction ordinance was to make it clear exactly what was required for an applicant to mine sand and gravel in Union Township. Sand and gravel is a necessary part of our lives. We don't have road projects without it. We don't build bridges. We don't build homes. Sidewalks, there's all sorts of things we don't build if we don't have a ready source of sand and gravel. And those materials are not something that can be trucked from long distances. They're expensive to truck over land. And so we do need local sources. And that is the intent of the extraction ordinance, is to basically say, these are the requirements, follow these requirements and secure an extraction permit. The removal of the special use permit is simply, as I said, a corresponding element to follow what the Board of Trustees did on May 12th with their adoption of the new ordinance.
I see Eric has his hand up.
Yeah, so I just wanted to emphasize in response to one of the comments, the movement towards amending the zoning ordinance has been, it started in January. It's been in progress well before any litigation was filed.
Right.
The two are not in any way connected.
Yeah, if we'd held our March meeting, the public hearing actually was scheduled, and the notice is published at the time that the shutdown orders came into being, and so the meeting was not held. But we actually had this public hearing scheduled for our March meeting.
Doug?
Yeah, so Rodney, under the now that sand and gravel pits would be a permitted use in the ag district, any idea how many parcels with the new requirements or restrictions, however you want to refer to them, in that ordinance, how many parcels of land in our township that there would actually be an opportunity for a gravel pit?
Well, that's a very much, it depends. Of course, this is an area that has sand and gravel deposits. The property for which the special use permit application was made, that you held a public hearing last December for that started this process, is one that at least the owner of that property believes that there's adequate resources there that are mineable. I'm sure that there are other properties that are. In our quick look, we identified 2 other parcels where there had been sand and gravel extraction activities in the past, where it was obvious that there was some activity that had gone on. We're not aware of any other active sand and gravel operations right now in the township. There are others that sites that have had it in the past, and those sites had closed down. And as I said, there were two that we identified where the activity had gone at some point and it appears to have just been abandoned, or at least temporarily abandoned. But any property in the agricultural district that has mineable sand and gravel could conceivably be brought before you for an extraction permit under that new ordinance, if chosen, the owner chose to do so. There are some exceptions in the extraction ordinance. I suppose I can mention those. One of the questions that came up is what about a kind of an incidental borrow pit, you might say. Some of the road projects in the area will contract with a local farmer and dig out a certain amount of sand or a certain amount of gravel locally to do some repair on the roads or use in some right in the immediate neighborhood on a road project. Where this activity would be very limited nature. It might run for a few days or even a few weeks, and it's done. That is one of the exceptions to the extraction ordinance. So that activity doesn't require an extraction permit and can simply continue as it has been done. There are other exceptions in the extraction ordinance, but that's probably one of the more prominent ones.
So would it be safe to say that the site that the applicant wanted to put the sand and gravel pit, I think was at Lincoln and Millbrook, does that sound right? That site, and I'm not really sure, my assumption is that site no longer qualifies to be able to put something there, just even though that it's in an ag district, is that correct?
Oh, no, definitely qualify under the extraction ordinance. The new ordinance, the applicant, the owner of the property right now, could apply under the new extraction ordinance for an extraction permit and move forward if they chose to secure that extraction permit under the new ordinance. It certainly qualifies for it.
But they've decided not to apply for that. Instead, they've decided to go the litigation route. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know if they've decided not to apply for it one way or the other.
Well, I mean, at this time, they haven't applied for one, but they've served the township. I mean, notice.
They are the plaintiff, in the case.
That's an accurate statement.
Thank you.
I'll just, at this point, I'll interject. I noticed that we have an attendee now. I don't know what the commissioner's will is on this, whether we want to give that person an opportunity to speak if they want to. They haven't attempted to, I don't know what the exact instructions are, but I don't see any indication that they're seeking permission to speak. But what's your pleasure on that? Anybody object to giving them an opportunity to speak if they wish to do so?
No
If they're
objection.
going to speak specifically about this text amendment, I would agree. If you want to give them 3 minutes to speak, but if it's not about this text amendment, no.
Right. No, I'm talking about on the public hearing. Is there a way for either Jennifer or Rodney to communicate with that person, ask them if they want to speak, or how does that work?
Well, at the bottom of their screen, in the bottom center, is the raise your hand icon that they can see in the bottom of the main screen. So they can raise their hand, but I can also simply click to allow them to talk, and we can ask them right now if you'd like.
Well, or I can just say that we recognize that Denise is attending the meeting, and if Denise, we had already held the public hearing and no one was here at that time, so we went ahead and closed the public hearing back up on the zoning ordinance amendment. So if Denise wanted to offer a public comment on the zoning ordinance amendment application, If she wants to do that, if she clicks on the raise hand button, I will recognize her and we'll let her make a public comment. If she's not here to make a public comment on, or doesn't wish to make a public comment then on that, then there's no reason to do that at this time. And if she wants to talk about something else, there's general public comment later in the meeting. So I'll kind of monitor that and see if she ultimately does that. I had a question to go back to the lot definition issue. We have two types of condominiums, as I've learned since I've been on the planning commission. We have the kind that I think of, which is you have a building that's divided into units within the building. But then we also have these essentially subdivisions of land where each sector of the lot is a condominium. And so what about, where do those fall in this?
Well, as you can see, essentially in the lot definition, it has three parts. And the first two parts refer to land area. And it's noting that it has sufficient land area to satisfy requirements of the ordinance for lot coverage, lot area, buildable areas, the yard setbacks, other open space. These are all physical characteristics of the land, and it indicates that a lot must have an area of land associated with it, and particularly land that can satisfy these requirements, lot coverage and setbacks and such like that. And then the third is that it has direct frontage or access and access to a public or private road right of way. So you're absolutely right about condominiums in that although the Condominium Act really only recognizes one kind of condominium, it's simply a condominium unit as a division of a property. In Michigan, the effective nature of condominiums is there are two types. One is condominium area of a building, as you said, and the other is what is often called a site condominium, which looks like a single family lot. With an area of land and a place for the single family home to be built on it. The site condominium was created essentially by the development community in response to the aggravations that back in the 70s to try to get a subdivision plat approved. The Subdivision Control Act had gotten very complex. So developers tried to make an end run around it by creating this new thing called a site condominium that looked in every way like a subdivision, but instead of a platted lot, and instead of a single deed for that lot, it became a site condominium unit and had two deeds: an individual deed for the lot or unit in the condo, a site condo, and then a master deed for the overall development. So it was kind of a unique creature in Michigan in that way. In this case, a site condominium unit would meet the definition of lot because it has a physical area of land and it shows it has land for setbacks and those other elements. A condominium unit in an existing building would not meet the definition of lot. That, I think, is probably the key differential, because a condominium unit in an existing multi-tenant building does not have land associated with it within the boundaries of that individual unit that meets the setbacks and other pieces. I don't know if that's helpful.
That does, yes. Because and my recollection is that you mentioned about that the site condominiums would have houses on them. My recollection is they can also be used for businesses. I think we have one right up on Pickard, right catty corner to the Township Hall, where there are businesses. And so the bottom line is that type of arrangement, each business could have its own signs independently of the other, whereas the ones internal to a building would not be able to under this arrangement.
Right. And the difference is really related to the freestanding signs. A multi-tenant office building or a multi-tenant commercial building, each tenant in that building can have their own building mounted signage. That's all in the ordinance, just as you see in a shopping center or a multi-tenant office building. Each one can have building mounted signage on their own, but in that kind of a circumstance, there's typically one freestanding sign under which each of the individual tenants has some piece of that sign, like you see in the shopping centers, where Walmart and Kohl's and whoever else, they each have a little chunk of the big sign out the road.
Okay, thank you. Alex had his hand up and then it went away. I don't know if he still has a comment or not.
No, Rodney answered my question there. I had the same question in line with you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? I guess I want to ask Eric maybe to expound on one of the things I was looking at was, and of course I haven't read the entire extraction ordinance, but we have a summary of the ordinance in our packets. And on page 2 of that summary, which is page 19 of your packet, at the top there, it talks about what the Planning Commission's role is going to be, assuming that if all of this goes through. And it talks about Planning Commission determining all of these different conditions have been met. And some of them are actually that the project is not going to adversely affect water table, water quality, wells, surface water resources, all this type of thing. And so I guess I wanted to, since we have an attorney here, I guess I wanted to hear his take on what our legal responsibilities are with regard to those determinations.
Well,
I'll end up working in practice going forward.
yeah, I'll primarily defer to Rodney on this, but I think you're going to receive documentation and guidance from staff as to what the project limits are, what the project design is, in order to allow you to make such a decision. But as far as the details of the operation of the ordinance, I'll defer to Rodney. As far as the legal side of it, if we need to get into that in detail, but I think I'll leave it at, you'll be provided with reports, documents, summaries, and have the ability to seek whatever advice you think is appropriate before you make such a decision.
Right.
I can give a little bit more on that. The State Planning and Enabling Act, which is the state act that creates this planning commission as a body, includes a provision that puts the township Township Board of Trustees under an obligation to ensure that you have the expertise available to you when you need it, whether that's legal, engineering, planning, whatever expertise you believe you need to be able to render an informed decision. The State Planning Act essentially says you have the ability to secure that expertise before you make a decision on a matter. And of course, our Board of Trustees has been very active in making sure that the Planning Commission has the support you need and the advice you need from professionals in certain fields, like myself, like Eric, like Peter, so that whenever you have an item before you, you have the ability to make an informed decision. In this particular case, the extraction ordinance does include, as was said, some obligations related to determining that the property is not going to, or the extraction operation is not going to create a nuisance related to pollution or altering wells or other elements like that. It also includes specific information requirements. Section in the summary, on that same page is section 7 entitled base documents. And in fact, it's really from there to section 10 are the base documents. And these base documents are the details for how a particular application it may impact, what impacts it may have on surrounding properties, on water resources or other elements. Most of these requirements, which include one, for example, is hydrogeologic study, which is essentially looking at groundwater levels on the property and in the surrounding area. Many of these, like that one, are aimed at extraction operations that intend to go below the groundwater table. That is, they intend to create a new lake or pond on the property. So they'd be mining down below the water table at some point. And those are the types of operations that would have an effect, for example, potentially on neighboring wells. Because if they lower the groundwater flows in the area, it may cause a well that's relatively shallow in neighboring property to become to go dry, or it may change the water quality in that well. So the required information that would be coming before you as part of an extraction operation application would include a study of those issues, and it does require a minimum number of monitoring wells to be provided, either existing wells or, if necessary, new ones. And it also asks that the applicant to use publicly available data, such as county well records, to create the information you need, to establish the information you need to be able to understand what's happening with regards to water table in the area. The same thing applies for other potential. The scale, as I said, the scale of the information that's required is based on the scope of the operation. An operation that's not going into the water would have far fewer requirements in terms of what they need to bring before you. They still need to provide the data to show where the groundwater level is, so they can show they're staying above it. But beyond that, it would not be required of them to provide information, out beyond the property for a large distance, or address other wells in the area, because they're not going to get into the water table where they would be affecting those wells. The other element that's in the extraction ordinance is language that states that the township can hire a civil engineer or hydrogeologist or other expert to review the application materials that come to you. So the applicant is required to provide the information, and you are given the ability in the ordinance to have the expertise you need to review that information and to confirm its accuracy, and if necessary, to collect our own information to either confirm it or not. The ordinance states that the applicant is responsible for reimbursing the township for the costs of that kind of expertise, just as an applicant pays for the cost of certain items that come part of the review of the application. That's what the fee is for. So you will have, with any application comes before you, will have access to the experts you need to address these specific issues.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from commissioners? I will say one advantage to this is that the special use permit had a lot of very subjective criteria in the existing ordinance, and so given the nature of these types of projects, they are undoubtedly very difficult to assess in those subjective ways. So having this type of ordinance and this different procedure for dealing with them is has some logic to it for sure. And just to remind folks that our options, which are nicely laid out again in the packet, are to recommend as is to the Township Board, recommend approval with additional changes, recommend denial, or postpone.
If you need a motion, I'm happy to vote the motion.
We can always have a motion. If there's more discussion, we can have that too, but I'll recognize Denise.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend to the Township Board of Trustees that PTXT 20-01 zoning ordinance amendment to sections 3.41, 13.2, and 30.4 of the zoning ordinance number 1991S as amended to update the standards and approval process requirements for sand and gravel pits and other extraction operations, and to revise the definition of a lot. Be adopted as submitted.
So that motion was made by Webster. Is there a second?
Mike,
Anybody else?
I'm glad to
Support.
second that.
there we go.
Yeah.
So
Sorry.
I see Darren with a second. Bunch of people are muted right now, so if they're trying, they're not going to be heard.
Mike actually gave a second to that, but he was muted at the time.
Yeah, I got that. So the motion was by Webster, second by Darren. Further discussion. Motion is to recommend the changes as prepared.
Hey, just quick note, hey, Rodney, I want to confirm, is the public hearing portion been removed from this extraction ordinance? Is that correct?
The special use permit requirement. I mean, stop. I may have misunderstood you. Are we talking about the zoning ordinance amendment here, or are we talking about the extraction ordinance was adopted by the Board of
Yeah, the
Trustees?
extraction ordinance, if somebody comes through with that, there is no public hearing. So if somebody has an issue with it or to come to speak in favor of it, there is no public hearing for that. Is that correct?
That is not correct. There is a public hearing requirement in the extraction ordinance. One of the reasons that we selected to pursue the new extraction ordinance was related to the limitations for notifying the neighbors under a special use permit, which the State Zoning Act has a limitation of 300 feet. That's as far as we can notify for a special use permit application. The challenge is the impacts of an extraction operation extend far beyond 300 feet.
Sure.
Because they involve noise, they involve dust that may go further. They also involve truck traffic and the impacts associated with heavy trucks that extend beyond that 300 feet. And so by doing this new extraction ordinance, we also were able to establish a more consistent requirement for the distance that a notice would go out for a public hearing. So yes, it is in the extraction ordinance. The notice requirements are there. They are a bit broader than what the special use permit required.
Okay.
But it is definitely there, so the neighbors will be notified.
Okay, so did they increase the distance? So anybody like within 600 feet?
2,000.
Yes, it went up to 2,000 feet. Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you. I couldn't remember. Appreciate that.
Any other discussion on the motion or any other final questions? Seeing none, then I'm going to ask Jennifer to call the roll for the vote.
Webster,
Aye, yes.
Waring,
Yes.
Cody,
Yes.
Shingles,
Yes.
LaBelle,
Nay.
Quattrito,
Yes.
Fuller,
Yes.
and Darren.
Yes.
I believe the vote was 7-1. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So the motion carried. This will go as a recommendation to the township board. Okay. So we'll move next to other business. The other business is the zoning ordinance update, and I'll just follow the what's exactly on the agenda. The first subsection of this is updates from staff. So Rodney, is there anything you'd like to offer by way of an update before we and in so doing, I'll just ask you to kind of give us some guidance as to what remains to be discussed here, or if we're just taking people's random comments at this point.
So we went through our last meeting. We went through the ordinance, primarily focusing on the key sections that were referenced in the staff report for the May meeting. But we did take some questions and comments from on some other pieces as well. It was kind of, I guess, a quick tour through the document. There were several items. I think the primary one was related to the grading permit process and requirements associated with that that were raised as a concern. We're looking at those, and we'll be bringing basically bringing an amended text to you to take a look at a future meeting. Idea that if you're comfortable with it, it could be incorporated into the as adopted zoning ordinance. So that part is still in process. Really where we are right now is looking at sort of two elements. One is, are there what I would call punch list items that you see that will need to be addressed in the as adopted ordinance. The grading permit was one. We did have some written comments that came in related to some typographical errors, and I always appreciate those. Having multiple eyes in a document, people see things. One person will see something, others don't. I just had that happen today where I took a look at a notice, and fortunately somebody else took a look at it after me and caught that the date was wrong. I looked at it 3 times and didn't catch the date was wrong, and it was right in front of me. The eye just kind of went right over it. So typos do happen, and we appreciate those. And so you just send me an email and with anything like that. But we are looking at, are there any other items, kind of, let's call it policy items, in this proposed ordinance that are concerned to you, that in some way you feel were not exactly what you asked the consultant to do or put together. And if there are any, then we try to address those before this moves forward to a public hearing. The idea, what we'd like to do would be to, rather than create another new draft, that as long as you are comfortable overall with this document, even if there's some kind of punch list details that need to be addressed, if you're comfortable overall with the document, the idea would be that we could move it forward to a public hearing and begin that part of the adoption process, to formally invite public comment on the ordinance, and as I said, take an adoption. If there are details in here that essentially you feel make it absolutely necessary to update the draft and present a new draft before we go to a public hearing, we can do that. So this is really up to you at this point. I suppose the next step, once we've through discussing the ordinance and answering any questions you have, the next step really is for you to make a determination as to whether you're comfortable with putting it out for public review in a public hearing at a future meeting.
Okay. So based on that, I guess what I'd like to do is just open the floor at this point. If there's any comments that commissioners have on just what Rodney said, are there any remaining concerns that anyone has at this point that haven't been addressed? Alex?
Yeah, how did we handle these grading permits and 20 cubic yard requirements? districts and things like that. I don't think we came to a resolution.
The what you asked for was ask us to look at that and revise it to eliminate the appearance that we're trying to regulate very small amounts of grading changes, and so that's what we're in the process of reviewing, and we're looking at how the current ordinance handles it, and we're also looking at how some other ordinances handle it. We're going to come back with something that's consistent with the direction you gave, which was that you don't want to make a major change to the current policies.
I think I would like to see that before I went to a public hearing, though.
Well, what we would be doing, I guess, and that's certainly fine. What we would be doing with regards to that and any other changes is we would essentially put that out there. I mean, let's say for that section, we put it out there and say this is is intended to be part of consideration of the proposed ordinance is consideration of this alternative language for grading permits. But I should be able to have something ready for the next planning commission meeting. It's going to be close, but I should be able to do that. So if you'd like, we can simply have that on the agenda as part of the next meeting.
Yeah, that'd be great. I would appreciate that.
Yep.
Other comments that people have? As Rodney pointed out, we did restrict ourselves to the sections that were in his memo last time, but we could, people have comments or questions on other sections as well. Lisa?
There's just a small thing. I was looking through both of our notes from before the changes were made. And our newer one, it's on 10-2. It was under summary of minimum landscaping requirements. I wrote in it, because we discussed it at one of our previous meetings, 1 shade tree per 5 spaces. I think we agreed that that was too many, like trees, but I don't know. I'm not sure what the changes were that we wanted, but I noticed that wasn't changed. But.
So that was from our original, like when we were going through the entire document.
Yeah.
So presumably Peter has some notes on that because he would have been taking the notes at the time.
We can take a look at that. I'm not going to ask Peter to pull out of his memory and what the notes might have said, but we can take a look at those meeting notes and get an answer back on it. You're essentially, Lisa, you're essentially saying that number is too high, as that you had asked for it to be adjusted.
Yeah, like 1 shade tree per 5 spaces. I think they wanted it like per more, or like 1 tree per. I can't remember what we discussed. I didn't write it down, but it was 10 spaces or something like that. Because we would have trees all over the place for parking lots.
We'll take a look at that.
Trees are good, right?
I think so, but
they produce oxygen. They're very good.
Rodney, one question I had was whether in fact we're going to have an updated zoning map, official zoning map with the changes that indicate as part of this ordinance changes. Are you going to have an updated map with the appropriate zoning districts that matches this new zoning ordinance?
Yes, actually, Peter, could you comment on that for us?
Yeah, so the 2 major changes that we're having with the zoning ordinance map is we will no longer have a B6 zoning district. That'll be absorbed as a B7. There's only really one area of the township. It's basically on Pickard Road east of Packard, and pretty much about Belmont. So in that kind of general area on Pickard Road, where we have B6 properties, those will be absorbed as B7 properties. And then there are a couple locations in the residential districts. We have the R5 zoning, which is, if you recall from our reviews, is a bit redundant. We already have an R4 zoning district that allows for mobile modular home districts. And the R5 is a single wide mobile home district. And so there's no need for the two districts. And so the R5 districts, where you see them at in the township, there's two locations. They're in residential developments where other houses and other properties in the same neighborhood are zoned R2B. And so it would be a kind of a natural absorption for R2B to be the new zoning district for those R5 properties. And so those properties have been identified, and we're working on getting a new draft updated zoning map for you guys to have at the public hearing.
Okay, so then to answer my question is that during this public hearing, we'll have, because there are some people who get concerned when you change zoning districts, that they'll understand what has changed from the past before to now and how that's going to change. So you're going to have a current map and now then the new map that shows how these zoning districts are being absorbed. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Alex?
Yeah, I don't know if these are little punch list typo things, but 3-11, minimum dwelling unit width is now 30 feet. It was 18 feet. But if I reference back to 4-1, schedule of regulations, and look at R2B, minimum building width is 18, but on this page it says 30. And I'm thinking it's a typo, but I just want to make sure because there's a few of them down there. R1 is different. R2B, R3A is different with the rear setback.
The if you look at the minimum dwelling width, actually in the ag district, the R1, all of them are listed as 30 feet. That number can be set at any number you choose, but it's set in this proposed ordinance at 30 feet. I think it was Peter was just mentioning earlier. He was talking about modular manufactured homes. That kind of language, the minimum dwelling width, was established typically to simply ensure that all single-family dwellings meet a certain standard, and it had the effect of zoning out single-wide mobile homes on an individual lot, but doing it in a way that was consistent with state law, instead of just simply declaring that single-wide mobile homes couldn't,
right,
because we can't discriminate based on type of construction, but we can set minimum dimensional standards. And so that's where the 30 feet comes in. The number, though, can be set anywhere you wish, right?
But if you go back to section 4, Rodney.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Schedule of regulations, they don't match what's on.
Oh, I see. Okay. I didn't realize that you were talking about the conflict there. Got it. No, they sure don't. Well, your preference there is I mean, we certainly can have the others corrected to match the 18 feet.
I'm not. I was just thinking it was a typo that the schedule of regulations did not match what our desire was on the other page. I do like the 30-foot building minimum.
So I guess is there a preference on that? I mean, the number can be set where we wish. I've seen more common to set it at 24 feet, so that we're not accidentally eliminating the ability of somebody to have a modular dwelling that what often is called a double wide put on an individual lot. 30 feet creates a challenge because that's wider than a double wide unit can really be. A 2-section unit can be. So if I was going to make any recommendation to you, it would be to set it at 24 feet rather than 30. But I have no objection to beyond that to whatever number you might choose. If you wanted to leave it 18, we could too.
Right. My opinion is I wouldn't want to, make this so tight that somebody couldn't have a manufactured home, which are generally, like you said, 12 feet a section. So 24 would be acceptable to me.
Anybody have a contrary or point of view? I think 24 sounds reasonable as well. Well, not seeing or hearing any, why don't we suggest that that change be made to 24 and just make sure it's consistent in wherever spots it appears.
Okay. Thank you.
Other comments that people have or questions or thoughts that they want to bring up at this time?
I have one in regards to section 710. You talk about sidewalks and pathways, but I don't see a definition of what a sidewalk is and a pathway. And should we have a definition of what a sidewalk is versus a pathway, because they are different? And should they be defined, or are we making reference to some other definition in some other ordinance? And I don't believe we've defined those well, unless I'm mistaken. Peter, I don't think we have this in our sidewalk ordinance, do we? In regards to the definition?
Let me just look that up very quickly. I do believe it talks about something, what a pathway and what a sidewalk is.
And so therefore, if it's there, should we make reference to that ordinance somewhere?
Or should they be just added to the all the
Definitions in this? That's correct.
Yes.
That's my only comment that I had, that I saw.
Section 2 has all the definitions, but I agree they're not in there.
So anytime a term used in the ordinance is not defined in the ordinance, then the standard dictionary definition and that language, I think, is in there to that effect. So in this case, it'd be simply the standard dictionary definition of pathway and sidewalk would be what would be used to define those terms. So we don't necessarily have to have the terms defined in definitions. I don't object to them being there, but we don't necessarily have to. I guess, Peter, I don't know if you had a chance to look up the ordinance yet or not.
Yeah, so there is a definition in our sidewalk ordinance of a pathway and a sidewalk listed in section 3 of the sidewalk ordinance, which is definitions.
So I'm wondering, since we have a definition somewhere that we apply to, and I don't know if they actually correspond to the dictionary, I didn't really look at it, but should we not mention that ordinance within this? That's my question.
Mm-hmm.
I think because we have a definition in our ordinance, we ought to put that same definition in this book. Not everybody wants to jump back and forth.
Right.
the different ordinances. So,
Yeah, it doesn't seem like a lot to ask to add those two definitions to section 2.
Yep. And we can also add a reference to the ordinance in this section 710 here as well.
Other things? So the other item in this to discuss is timing for a public hearing. So it sounds like we might get the update on the cubic yards of dirt thing by our meeting on the 16th. So I guess I'll ask Rodney and Peter, what were your, like, do you have thoughts in mind about when it would be appropriate to have a public hearing, assuming we feel like this is getting close to, what we want to put out there?
So I guess I just give you, before I answer that, we do have one other meeting coming up, and this sort of helps to inform on the public hearing element. We have had an open house. McKenna Associates has had in their schedule the idea of holding an open house event on the new ordinance as part of this process all the way through. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 virus pandemic took down the event we had scheduled for the end of April. That was supposed to be an in-person event. We asked them to look into having an open house event as an electronic meeting, and they have set that up. We've set it for June 30th. You're certainly welcome to attend. This is intended for the public, but you're certainly welcome to attend and invited to attend. It'll be June 30th at 7 p.m. and it will be a Zoom meeting. The details for that I received today, the Zoom meeting details for that, so I will be putting that information out very shortly this week, and also getting it out in a press release and hopefully getting it out in some other resources the Chamber of Commerce has offered to get it out on their social media, and so that'll be out for invitations. It will be a Zoom meeting, and it's intended basically. Chris Dusen will give a short presentation on the history of the project and how we got here. And then be answering questions from the public and anybody else that has a question about the ordinance from their perspective. So that's one of the public input elements that will be happening as part of that original schedule of events for this project. With regards to the public hearing itself, the earliest we could have it would be the July meeting, your July regular meeting, which I believe is July 21st. You don't have to set that meeting that hearing date tonight. We can include this on your next agenda for the 16th. And if you were to set a hearing that night, we would have enough time to get the required notices out for that event. But that would be the first available date, essentially, for a public hearing, would be your regular July meeting.
One of the things that happened with, in my opinion anyway, happened with the last revision to the master plan was that we went through this whole long process and had these events, public hearing, open house, whatever, and got to the end and we're basically ready to approve this thing. And then only at that point did things, people start coming out of the woodwork with comments and concerns and questions. Is any feeling whether July is a bad time to hold a public hearing from the standpoint of people not really paying attention any less than any other time of year? I don't know that, I'm not saying that that was an issue with respect to the master plan. I don't remember what the calendar was on that, but I just know that it didn't seem like the same people who ended up with those concerns towards the end were really the people, you know, saying stuff at the public hearing.
Well, it is often the case when you update a zoning ordinance that people come in at the last minute. Some people wait until the item's in front of the Board of Trustees because they decide, and I've actually asked this question and learned that they had decided that it didn't matter to talk to the Planning Commission because the Board of Trustees was a deciding body, and so they were going to wait to talk to the Board of Trustees. And that's fine if they choose to do that. Some people about it late in the game. They read something in the paper, or they finally catch a notice. Zoning ordinance update, there's no individual mailed notices to people as there would be like a special use permit or rezoning. So some people kind of expect that they're going to get something in the mail, and of course there's nothing like that. So it often happens that people come in at the end. I worked on a zoning ordinance project where things have gone very smoothly. We'd had good comments all the way through. Got to the public hearing, and we had a room full of people at the public hearing because some ham radio operators had heard about this process and discovered in the ordinance that we were proposing to, as far as they were concerned, restrict ham radio antennas and towers in this community. They were up in arms, and one person found it. They then told their 40 other colleagues, and who told more, and we had a crowd of angry ham radio operators who learned at the hearing, when I understood what they were there for, who learned that in fact this ordinance unintentionally, as it was existing ordinance, unintentionally prohibited ham radio operators. They were not allowed legally in the township, and that this ordinance, the changes were actually intended to fix that problem. It led to a great conversation where we actually made some additional revisions. There were some things they said, once they understood, they said, well, can we do this and this and this, because this would be helpful. And those things were added to the document through the public hearing process. So even coming in last minute, it can be beneficial. We've had this ordinance out on the township website and on a link to a separate website that McKenna prepared since March. We have put the ordinance into the hands of some of the development community that have been interested in it, and they have been, the comments we've received back so far have been, they've been pleased with what they saw. The public hearing process obviously will raise the bar again. We'll have some kind of a press release as well as the ordinance to invite comment, to draw people to that website that McKenna hosts for us, where written comments can come in. So far, I'm not aware of any written comments coming in through that website, but we'll have that information available. So it's been out there. It certainly will be out there through the hearing process, but I can't make any guarantees we won't have a crowd at the last possible minute. It does happen, and fairly commonly.
If I could make a comment in regards to, if I understood you, Rodney, we're going to have a Zoom meeting on June 30th for the public to be involved with?
This is an open house event that McKenna is hosting.
Right.
Yep, and it is a meeting on the ordinance, but McKenna is hosting it, and it's part of the original project schedule that we had for this project.
Okay. However, we also understand that a lot of people do not have technology. Mm-hmm. They are not able to do that. So then, therefore, a face-to-face with the public to give them the opportunity, we are excluding those individuals who do not have technology, don't understand Zoom, are not involved in this and, don't even want to get involved with this. I wonder if we are then excluding part of our township people in regards to, if that's the only way, besides the public hearing, would we be better to have the June Zoom if we wish, and then at our July meeting, possibly invite the public so that we could hear them before we actually have a public hearing, which would then, it would delay it another month. I realize that, but again, if the reason why we're being so delayed at this point is related to the COVID-19, what's another month?
And I don't have any objection to that. We don't know where the restrictions are going to go. We have our electronic meeting authority under the governor's executive order expires on June 30th. She's not given a whole lot of indication in the past what she's going to do when she's extended these kinds of things. So I have no idea if she's going to extend that authority further, or even if she will be able to extend it further because of where emergency declaration issues are going. So after June 30th, we may be in person anyway. But we also don't know where her executive orders are going with regards to the ability to hold in-person meetings. Right now, we are still limited to, I think it's 10 people gathered inside for a public meeting. The restrictions on restaurants and some other places are relaxing. But for an in-person public meeting, we're still limited by the gathering of 10, I think it is. That again is likely to change before our July meeting, but right now we are limited. So I don't have any objection to waiting longer, but we are somewhat left to wonder exactly what that will look like in the months ahead. In that same way, quite frankly, the hearing process may be a challenge. If we'll need to know more than 15 days ahead how we can hold the hearing, whether electronic or otherwise, so that we can get the notice in the paper.
My comment was just strictly related to those individuals in the outer portions of our township that may not have the ability to have technology. You are excluding them unless we can figure out a way in which they can at least provide some kind of notice, a written or something, a phone call, something besides Zoom. That was my only comment.
Well, actually, every Zoom meeting it can be accessed via dial-in telephone. Now, it doesn't give you a video, but anyone can dial in to any of these meetings, and anyone can, if they do have a need for special accommodations, they can request them, and we must grant them. And so that's part of the notice requirements, that if somebody has a need for interpreters or other assistance to be able to access the meeting, we are obligated to provide it. So far, nobody's asked.
And if that's the case, I think we'd have to make that even more explicit. So that's my own comment.
Well, and to add to Commissioner Webster's comment, I think that's a great point, because this is a major issue. And I guess my first question would be, do we have a drop dead timeline? We know that our original timeline has been upset a little bit by COVID. This was moving along in the process, but my thought would be, to that point, one, we don't know who it impacts. We can move forward with the June 30th meeting as scheduled, but would it be appropriate to pause after that, and until we can have a face-to-face meeting, that those who, it may not be about accessibility to technology as much as it might be understanding technology. And people understand getting in their car, driving to the township hall and standing in a meeting and being heard. That's commonplace, but this technology thing is not, it's not known to all. So I guess in the interest of what our duty and responsibility would be, it's to make sure that we're hearing from the public, and that should include everybody. So I guess that turns into a question: what is our end goal in terms of timeline for completion of this to get it through the various approval processes so that it can go to the trustees for final approval.
Well, we're under no particular time frame for this.
Okay.
This is something where we have an ordinance in place. Obviously, we administer that ordinance every day. The changes are designed to improve our ability to administer the ordinance and to achieve better results than we are currently. The proposed ordinance is also part of implementing the master plan, which is an important element. We do have some development community members that are interested in this new ordinance because it provides them some tools that they may be able to use to present to you a better project. Certainly, at least allows them some more flexibility to propose innovative project ideas and for you to be able to consider them. So there are reasons to move the new ordinance forward, but there's not a reason to rush. Our current ordinance certainly has validity and has no concern in that regard.
Rodney, is there? Let me interrupt you real quick. Is there any impact contractually with McKenna in terms of what their expiration date may be related to what they're contractually obligated to?
Well, they had a project time frame, and that project time frame is we're already beyond it. But it was an anticipated schedule. It was not a required "thou shalt do it" in this time frame schedule. So they are obligated to certain tasks, basically going forward in terms of providing updated documents and such. But no, there's no expiration to their contract.
Okay, thank you.
I think those are all valid concerns. Probably we're going to have to play it by ear for the next maybe month or so and see what that looks like in terms of whether we can start to have meetings in the township hall, whether we can start to have people showing up to address us or not. If we happen to get if the thing starts to go up again and people start to say, no, it's too risky, then we're in the question of, well, how long do we really want to wait? Do we want to shelve this for a long period of time or what have you? But we may know a lot more by June 30th or whatever, or certainly by our July meeting, whether we're able to bring people into the township hall yet this summer. So we probably don't, as Rodney said, we don't have to make any decisions tonight. I guess I would suggest go ahead and put this as at least a discussion item on the on the June agenda, so that we can revisit it even on the 16th and see where we are. Other comments from people on either that or just the document itself? Everybody else is muted, so they're either drinking or eating or listening to music or something like that. Other comments? Well, I'm not seeing or hearing any. I'm going to assume that we've kind of discussed this for tonight. So we have just a couple more agenda items. We've got extended public comment. So this is the portion of the meeting where individuals are invited to address the Planning Commission on any item, whether it was on tonight's agenda or not. If anyone would like to address the Planning Commission, press your raised hand button and we'll recognize you and give you an opportunity. We just ask you give us your name and address for the minutes and limit your comments to 5 minutes. So extended public comment is open at 8:37. I know at least one of us had an issue with locating the raised hand button. I don't know if, Rodney, I think you said you could ask our guest.
I found it.
Oh, you found it?
I did.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah. For
User error.
I mean, I think there the instructions look relatively good. I mean, I'm assuming people, but we do have an attendee, but I don't know whether she wants to say anything or not.
Well, I did notice during our discussion of the zoning ordinance, her hand raised for a moment. I don't, it may have been simply trying it out, but the hand went up and the hand went away.
Okay.
At that time.
I've been toggling back and forth between us and the attendees, so I didn't see it.
It was not up for long. But,
Oh,
I can certainly, if you like, I can unmute her and just to see if.
Yes, I will recognize attendee Denise for a comment.
Okay, I have clicked the Ask to Unmute mute button for her.
Thank you, Rodney. Did that work?
It did.
Hi, it's Denise Richards, 2283 East Millbrook Road. My home is the property most adjacent to the proposed gravel pit. I've spoken at many meetings. I just wanted to let you know that I'm speaking for some of the community as well who cannot always get on Zoom. Just to reiterate that we do not want a gravel pit. Obviously, no one probably does, at least no one I've ever talked to. And we've done a lot of research on this topic. So I just wanted to put that on the record. Regarding Zoom, I would also like to put on the record that while some folks, yes, internet is difficult out here. Many of us don't have good access. The opposite side of that is that some of us would rather attend a Zoom meeting than in January, February, go out in the ice and snow. So I'm not sure if it's possible. I just wanted to bring this up to continue having the option of Zoom once COVID has passed. I think you might find that some people would be more apt to attend, myself included, and especially if I'm out of the state or I'm out of town at a meeting time and I cannot come. That did happen to me once during the rather intense ordinance time. I would have liked to be at a meeting. I could have attended by Zoom, but at that point we weren't there. So that was the second point. Another point is that I've been becoming more involved as this issue has affected me personally. And what I've noticed with this new involvement is I want to say this in a politically correct way, the gender bias on the commission boards, mostly represented by males. And I know that people have to apply and they have to be interested in holding a position such as that, but I would like to encourage all of the boards and all of the commissions to assist in whatever way and maybe advocate in a more progressive way to encourage more women to be in those positions of leadership, so that women in our area can be more represented in our local politics. Thank you all so much for doing what you do, and that's all I have for today.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your comments. Okay, so since Denise was our lone attendee, I'm going to assume that there are no other public comments to be offered. We thank her for hers. So extended public comment is now closed at 8:42. Last item, final board comment. Any other comments from board members?
I appreciate when you are talking about some of the changes that you'd like to see. You reference a page. When you do that, that helps me being new and not, you probably have all worked with the book a lot more than myself and are familiar with it. So when you do, if you reference a page, it just helps me get there a little bit quicker and be a little bit more active. So I do appreciate that when you do that. And if you would continue, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments that people have? So just as a reminder, our next meeting, June 16th, 7 o'clock, right here. And if there's no other comments, then we've completed our agenda for tonight. So we'll stand adjourned, and thank everyone very much for their attendance.